What happens when a billionaire humiliates a black waiter in front of a packed dining room? It began with something small. Just a smile. Marcus Bennett leaned forward, placing a plate of perfectly seared salmon in front of an elderly woman whose hands trembled as she tried to steady her fork. Her hair was silver, pinned neatly at the back of her head, and a single string of pearls rested on her fragile neck. She looked like someone who'd known better days, someone who came here tonight for a memory of grace, not for spectacle. "Thank you, young man," she whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the low hum of conversation and the soft wail of a saxophone drifting from the corner of the room. Marcus noticed her struggle. He always noticed. That was the thing about him. He carried a heart too big for a job that asked him to be invisible. Most waiters in places like this didn't crouch down to meet their guests' eyes. They didn't stop long enough to offer more than a robotic smile before rushing to the next table. But Marcus wasn't most people. "Would you like me to cut this for you, ma'am?" he asked gently. "Make it easier?" She blinked in surprise. "Oh, that would be so kind." Marcus smiled, a smile that could melt frost on the coldest morning. "No problem at all." He picked up the knife and fork, cutting the salmon into perfect bite-sized pieces. Each slice was clean and neat, arranged in a way that spoke of quiet pride. "Chef's knife skills are good," Marcus said lightly. "But mine? Olympic level." The old woman laughed, a soft, trembling sound that carried more gratitude than words could hold. For a moment, Marcus felt something warm push back the chill of a long shift. It was in moments like this that he remembered why he did this job. Not for tips, not for praise, but for the rare chance to make someone feel seen in a world that passed them by. But peace doesn't last long in rooms where arrogance drinks wine. The sound came sharp and sudden, slicing through the music like a knife tearing silk. "Hey!" Marcus froze mid-motion, knife poised above the plate. Conversations broke like shattered glass, laughter silenced mid-breath. Even the saxophonist stumbled over a note before retreating into awkward quiet. The voice boomed again, louder, dripping with anger. "Is this your idea of service?" Marcus turned his head, slowly, like a man standing in the path of an oncoming storm. His eyes locked on the source, a man rising from his chair, his presence swallowing the space around him. Charles Wallace, 60, maybe older. Silver hair combed back with precision. A white suit so sharp it could cut through bone. Gold cufflinks gleamed on his wrists like miniature suns. Everything about him screamed wealth, and the kind of confidence born not from character, but from knowing the world bent to his will. Wallace slammed his palm against the table. Crystal glasses rattled. A thin river of red wine spilled across the white linen, bleeding like a wound. "I've been waiting 15 minutes for my steak. 15 minutes. While you're over here." He jerked his chin toward Marcus and the old woman, his voice curling with contempt. "Playing nursemaid?" The words burned through the silence, leaving behind a stench of humiliation. Heads turned. Some guests exchanged quick glances, their faces tight with discomfort, while others leaned in, hungry for drama. The rest pretended to stare at their phones, because indifference was easier than courage. Marcus straightened, shoulders squared, his breath slow and measured. On the surface, he wore calm like armor, but beneath it, a storm raged. An old, familiar storm that had lived inside him for years. The storm that came every time someone decided his dignity was theirs to tear apart. He set the knife down on the plate with deliberate care, as if the weight of that small motion might anchor the fury rising in his chest. And then he walked. Slow, steady steps toward the man who believed the ground itself should bow under his shoes. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the weight of every time Marcus had swallowed his pride just to keep a paycheck. Every time he'd worn that practiced smile like a mask to hide the sting of being seen as less. He stopped at the table, close enough to smell the cologne clinging to Wallace's suit. Thick, bitter, expensive. "Sir," Marcus said evenly, his voice a river running smooth over jagged stones, "I apologize for the delay. Your steak is on its way." Wallace's laugh cut him off. Harsh, mocking, the kind of sound that digs under your skin like a thorn. "Oh, I'll bet it is," Wallace sneered. "Maybe if you spent less time babysitting your little charity cases, you'd actually do your damn job." The sentence hit like a slap. The air grew heavy, the silence thick as tar. You could feel it crawling across the walls, settling into the corners, pressing down on every table. Marcus looked at him, and for a flicker of a second, the smile faded. Just a little. Enough for anyone paying attention to see the steel behind his eyes. The kind of steel that doesn't bend. And that was when the night began to turn. The silence in the room was heavy now, like a velvet curtain pulled tight across a stage. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the slow, uneven drip of spilled wine sliding off the edge of Wallace's tablecloth and landing on the marble floor with soft, sticky splashes. Marcus stood there, calm on the outside, but his pulse throbbed in his ears like distant drums. His skin prickled, not from fear, but from the sting of something far sharper, the weight of being seen as less. Again. Wallace didn't sit. He stayed standing, looming over the table like a self-crowned king surveying his kingdom. His voice came low and sharp now, like the edge of broken glass. "You think I'm paying $400 a head for this?" He waved his arm toward Marcus in a slow, deliberate arc, like he was brushing dirt off his jacket. "You think I came here to watch some charity act, huh?" The words hung there, thick with venom. Conversations at nearby tables shrank into whispers, barely audible above the pounding in Marcus's head. Inside, Marcus counted the beats of his breath. 1, 2, 3. Stay calm. That's what every job like this drilled into you. Smile. Apologize. Make it right. Because the customer is always right, even when they're dead wrong, especially when you're black. But tonight, that advice felt like swallowing glass. He opened his mouth to speak, but Wallace's voice steamrolled over his own. "I know your type," Wallace sneered, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a snarl. "Lazy, distracted, can't even handle a simple job without turning it into a performance." Marcus's jaw tightened. His type. The phrase echoed like a bullet ricocheting inside his skull. Before he could respond, another voice cut in. A softer, hesitant voice from behind Wallace. "Charles, maybe?" It was a woman, mid-40s, draped in a navy dress, diamonds glittering at her ears. Her hand rested lightly on Wallace's sleeve as if she could anchor him back to reason. Wallace jerked his arm free without looking at her. His eyes stayed locked on Marcus, sharp and cold as polished steel. "Don't maybe me, Claire. This is about standards." He jabbed a finger at Marcus, each word spat like venom. "And if this establishment can't deliver, then maybe it doesn't deserve customers like me." Marcus felt every eye on him now, pinning him to the floor like stakes in the ground. Some faces looked away when his gaze met theirs. Others stared with quiet curiosity, as if watching an experiment unfold. He could hear the whispers now, faint but sharp. "Did you hear what he said?" Poor guy. But you know, he should have been faster. Ugh, I hate scenes like this. Marcus swallowed hard, feeling the familiar burn rising in his chest. That burn that said, "Not again. Not this time." Still, he forced his voice steady, smooth like a calm river hiding jagged rocks beneath. "Sir," he said, "your order was placed less than 15 minutes ago. Our chef prepares each steak to—" "Spare me the speech," Wallace snapped, his laugh harsh and humorless. "I didn't come here for excuses. I came here for service. But clearly—" He paused, eyes raking over Marcus from head to toe with deliberate contempt, his tone dipping into something darker. "That's asking too much from someone like you." The room seemed to flinch at the phrase, "someone like you." Marcus felt it like a slap, not to his face, but to something deeper, something that carried the weight of every insult whispered, every door quietly closed, every job interview that ended with a smile that never reached the eyes. And Wallace? He smiled now. A slow, satisfied smile, as if he'd claimed victory before the battle even began. Marcus's fingers curled into his palms, nails biting into his skin. His mind screamed for release, for a comeback so sharp it could slice that smug expression clean off Wallace's face. But years of practice, of swallowing pride to survive, held him back like chains. Then, from somewhere deep inside, a voice rose. The voice that sounded like his grandmother on Sunday mornings, saying, "Baby, dignity ain't something they give you. It's something you never let them take." Marcus breathed in. The chains rattled. But before he could speak, Wallace leaned closer, so close Marcus could smell the sharp tang of his cologne. Bitter, heavy, suffocating. "You know what the real problem is?" Wallace's voice dropped, quiet now, almost intimate, the way a snake hisses before it strikes. "Places like this, hiring people like you, thinking you can fit in, thinking you belong here." The words landed like stones, heavy and deliberate. Something inside Marcus shifted, snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep. The kind of snap you don't hear, you feel. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the air had been sucked out, leaving only heat and the bitter taste of humiliation hanging in its place. Marcus stood still, but inside he was moving, fast, like a storm tearing through open fields. Wallace didn't move back. He didn't blink. He let the words linger, dripping slow, poison sweet, designed to corrode something deep. Thinking you can fit in. Thinking you belong here. Marcus had heard that voice before. Not Wallace's, but voices like his. At the job interview where they smiled wide until his name hit the paper. At the apartment showing where the landlord suddenly lost the keys. At the college bar where his white classmate whispered, "You're in the wrong place, man," like it was a fact of nature. Tonight, that voice wore a white suit and drank expensive wine. But it was the same voice, and Marcus could feel the weight of every time he'd let it pass, every time he'd swallowed hard and said nothing because bills had to be paid, because silence was safer than truth. But not tonight. He wasn't sure what tipped the balance. The old woman still sitting quietly behind him, pretending not to hear? The sharp stares from diners waiting for him to break? Or maybe it was Wallace himself, smirking like he'd just carved another notch in his belt of victories. Marcus spoke, his voice low but steady. "Sir," he said, "I don't think kindness makes anyone less capable of doing their job." Wallace's smile faltered, just a flicker, but it was there, a crack in the marble. "Oh," Wallace drawled, dragging the word out like a blade across glass. "So now you're giving me philosophy?" Is that what they teach at, what, night school? Where did they pull you from, son? Community college? Or one of those second chance programs? A sharp laugh burst from his throat, jagged and cruel. It echoed through the restaurant, bouncing off the crystal and silver, filling every quiet corner. A few guests chuckled nervously, not because it was funny, but because laughter felt safer than silence. Marcus felt heat crawl up his spine, but he didn't look away. "Your steak," Marcus said evenly, "will be ready shortly." "Oh, don't worry," Wallace sneered. "I'm sure it will, if it's not burnt or poisoned." He chuckled again, then added, voice rising, "Hell, maybe I should go back there and cook it myself. At least then I'd know it was done right." The words slammed into Marcus like waves, but he didn't move, didn't twitch. His hands hung loose at his sides, but inside they were fists clenched so tight his knuckles burned. From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw the restaurant manager hovering by the bar, shifting his weight nervously, pretending to read a tablet. Coward. He wasn't going to step in. Not against a man like Wallace. Not against money like his. Marcus knew the script. He'd seen it before. The manager would pull him aside later, whisper words like professionalism and customer experience, while never once saying what they really meant. Smile and take it, Marcus, because that's your job. The thought churned in his gut like spoiled milk. Wallace wasn't done. Men like him never ran out of venom. "You know what the real shame is?" he said, his voice now pitched loud enough to claim the entire room. "This place used to mean something. It was a brand, a name. And now?" He spread his arms, gesturing toward Marcus like he was holding up a piece of evidence in a courtroom. "Now it's hiring people who look like they belong." He paused, savoring it, letting every second stretch. In the kitchen washing dishes, not standing in the dining room. The blow landed hard. Gasps rippled across the tables like a sudden gust of wind. A woman near the back shifted uncomfortably, her hand flying to her mouth. Someone else muttered, "Jesus," under their breath. But no one moved. No one spoke up. Because it was easier not to. Marcus felt something inside him ignite. A spark, then a blaze, roaring through every nerve. He wasn't just angry. He was done. Done being the easy target. Done playing the role they wrote for him. Wallace leaned back, satisfied, and raised his glass like a victor toasting his own cruelty. And Marcus smiled. Not the polite smile he wore like armor. Not the hollow grin that said, "I'll take it because I need this job." This smile was different. Slow, sharp. A smile that carried the weight of something Wallace didn't see coming. "Enjoy your wine, sir," Marcus said softly, almost kindly. Then he turned away, walking back toward the service station, his steps steady, his mind burning with words he'd kept locked away for too long. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Something was shifting now. Something big. And when it broke, it wouldn't just rattle the silverware. It would shake the walls. The dining room had turned into a stage where every glance, every whispered breath, carried a weight Marcus could feel pressing into his skin. The chandelier above flickered slightly, casting long, trembling shadows across the polished floor, as if even the light itself hesitated to shine too brightly on what was unfolding. Marcus walked back toward the service station, his steps steady on the outside but thunderous inside his chest. The laughter, the murmurs, the stolen glances, they clung to him like smoke. He could taste it on his tongue, bitter and metallic, like blood. Behind him, Wallace was still talking. Of course he was. Men like him never ran out of words when they had an audience and someone to crush under their heel. "Unbelievable," Wallace said loudly, his voice booming across the room like a judge delivering a sentence. "I could run a better restaurant blindfolded. You'd think for these prices, we'd get someone who knows how to work, not some—" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, heavy with suggestion. The kind of silence that says more than the words ever could. A ripple of discomfort moved through the tables. A man in a gray suit shifted, cleared his throat like he wanted to speak, then didn't. A young couple in the corner pretended to scroll through their phones, their faces stiff as portraits. Marcus reached the service station, gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles whitened. For a moment, he stared at his reflection in the glossy wood paneling, a tall black man in a starched white shirt, the kind of uniform meant to erase individuality, to make you blend in until you disappear. His jaw was tight, his lips pressed into a thin line. Behind his own eyes, something burned, something raw and relentless. How many times had he stood in rooms like this, biting his tongue while men like Wallace measured his worth in stereotypes? How many times had he been told in 1,000 subtle ways that he didn't belong, no matter how hard he worked, no matter how good he was? The answer clawed at him like broken glass. Too many. And tonight, it felt like every one of those moments had been waiting, building, just to explode here. He reached for a napkin, unfolded it slowly, trying to ground himself in the simplicity of the motion. His hands moved automatically, years of practice reducing complex emotions to neat, perfect folds. But his mind was miles away, hurtling through memories he didn't ask for. His first job at 19, stocking shelves while his white supervisor called him "boy," like it was his given name. The night he got pulled over for a broken tail light and ended up face down on cold pavement because the officer felt unsafe. The look on the bank manager's face when Marcus applied for a small loan to start his own business. A look that said, "Not you. Never you." Every memory stacked on the next like bricks, building a wall of fire inside his chest. "Marcus!" The voice yanked him back. It was soft, hurried. Janine, the hostess. She stood beside him, her hands twisting the edge of her notepad, eyes darting nervously toward Wallace's table. "Marcus, maybe just let it go," she whispered. "You know how these things work." Marcus finished for her, his voice low, almost calm, though his hands trembled. She flinched, but said nothing. She didn't have to. They both knew the truth. This wasn't about a stake. It never was. Before Marcus could respond, the manager appeared. Frank, short, round, with a face that always seemed to glisten like he'd just run a marathon, even when he hadn't moved an inch. His smile was tight, strained, the kind that's less about reassurance and more about survival. "Marcus," Frank said, voice pitched low but urgent. "We've got a situation. Just smooth it over, all right? Apologize again. Comp the meal if you have to. The guy's a VIP, big donor to the mayor's campaign. We can't afford a scene." Marcus stared at him, and for a second, something almost like laughter bubbled up in his throat. Can't afford a scene? The scene was already here. It was written in every stare burning into his back, every whisper threading through the air. Frank must have seen something in Marcus's eyes, because his own narrowed, sharp and warning. "Don't make this about you, all right? Just do your job." Just do your job. The phrase hit harder than Wallace's words, because that was the script, wasn't it? The unspoken contract. Take the hits, swallow the insults, because a paycheck is worth more than your pride. Marcus set the napkin down slowly, deliberately, like laying the last stone on a grave. Then Wallace's voice boomed again, louder this time, slicing through the heavy quiet like a blade. "Are you still hiding back there, boy?" The word detonated in Marcus's chest. Boy. Not man. Not waiter. Boy. Heads turned sharply this time. No more pretending not to hear. The air thickened, hot and charged, vibrating with something that felt like electricity and violence all tangled together. Marcus moved. Not fast, not slow, just steady, each step a drumbeat echoing in the hollow silence. Every eye in the room followed him as he walked back to Wallace's table. Wallace was grinning now, wide and bright, like a cat watching a mouse march willingly into its jaws. He leaned back in his chair, arms spread along the backrest, his glass of wine dangling carelessly from his fingers. "There you are," he drawled, his voice slick with mockery. "Thought maybe you'd gone to cry in the kitchen, but I guess even you've got enough spine to come back for round 2. Marcus stopped beside the table, standing tall, his shadow stretching across the linen like a dark slash. His face was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes after the storm has decided it's done waiting. The room was silent now. So silent, you could hear the faint clink of ice melting in an abandoned glass 2 tables away. Wallace smirked, savoring the quiet like a man savoring the last bite of a fine meal. Then, slow and deliberate, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper just loud enough for the nearest tables to catch. "Go ahead," he said. "Say something. Entertain me." And for a long, stretching moment, Marcus said nothing. He just looked at him, really looked, until the smirk on Wallace's face started to twitch, just slightly, like a crack forming in stone. Then Marcus smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. The kind of smile that didn't belong to a man beaten down. The kind that belonged to someone who'd been pushed too far and had decided that this was the last push. And in that moment, the entire room leaned in, breathless, sensing that something was about to break. Something big. The room was holding its breath. Every sound, the soft hum of the air vents, the distant clink of glass, faded into a tense, aching silence. All eyes were locked on the 2 men standing on opposite ends of a battlefield made of linen, crystal, and pride. Marcus stood like a pillar, tall and still, every muscle drawn tight but calm on the surface. His heart wasn't racing anymore. No, it had slowed, heavy and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock before a verdict. The heat in his chest that had burned through the entire night was no longer fire. It was steel, cold, sharp, and unbreakable. Across from him, Wallace lounged in his chair, one arm draped casually over the backrest, his wine glass dangling between his fingers like a prop in a play. His smirk was still there, but thinner now, the edges starting to fray. For the first time all evening, there was a flicker in his eyes, so small most would miss it. But Marcus didn't. Fear. Wallace masked it with arrogance, the way men like him always did. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said softly, just loud enough for the nearest tables to catch, "Well, say something. Or is silence the only thing you're good at?" A few scattered laughs broke the tension like pebbles thrown into glass. Nervous. Forced. Marcus didn't blink, didn't move. Then, finally, he spoke. "You want me to say something?" His voice was calm, steady, but it carried, rolling across the room like a low, distant thunder that promised a storm. "All right, I'll say something." He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until the space between them was a thin thread, stretched to its breaking point. You think because you can write a check, because you wear a white suit, and drink wine that costs more than my rent, that makes you better than me. Marcus's eyes locked on Wallace's, unflinching, pinning him like a butterfly under glass. You think your money buys you the right to treat people like dirt, to talk down to them, to humiliate them in front of strangers. A murmur rippled through the room like a gust of wind through dry leaves. Phones slipped quietly out of purses, screens glowing, cameras rising like an unseen chorus, waiting for the climax. Wallace opened his mouth to speak, but Marcus didn't give him the chance. His voice rose, not loud, but deep, commanding, the kind of voice that pulled every ear and refused to let go. You want to know what I do when I'm not playing nursemaid? Marcus continued, his tone edged with steel. I run 2 jobs. I take care of my mother, who worked her hands raw, so I could stand here in this damn suit instead of rotting in a cell like this system wanted me to. I serve people like you every night, people who look at me and think they know my story before I open my mouth. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a quiet that cut sharper than a shout. But let me make one thing clear. My worth isn't written on your receipt. It's not hanging off your wrist. And it sure as hell isn't sitting in that chair. Gasps rippled through the room like waves. A man at the bar muttered something under his breath, something that sounded suspiciously like, damn. Wallace blinked, his smirk gone now, replaced by something brittle and pale. His fingers tightened around the stem of his wine glass, so hard the crystal trembled. Marcus straightened, his voice rising again. Not angry, not pleading, but ringing with a kind of truth that couldn't be bought or buried. You sit there talking about standards like you own the word. But let me tell you something, sir. Real standards aren't about how much you spend on a bottle of wine. They're about how you treat people when nobody's watching. They're about decency. And tonight, Marcus paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every word settle deep. Tonight, the only thing cheap in this room is your character. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. It was a storm waiting to break. And then it did. It started with a single clap from the back of the room, sharp and clear. Then another, and another, until the sound rolled through the dining room like thunder, a tidal wave of applause crashing against every wall. Guests stood, some hesitant at first, others rising fast, clapping, cheering, their voices blending into a roar that drowned out the soft strains of jazz still whispering from the corner. Wallace sat frozen, his face a storm of red and white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled gasping from water. He looked around for support, for someone, anyone, to back him up. But there was no one. Not tonight. Marcus didn't smile. Not yet. He simply turned, calm and collected, and began walking toward the kitchen. Each step felt like a weight lifting, like chains falling away one by one. As he reached the door, the old woman he'd helped earlier touched his arm gently, her eyes bright with something that shimmered between gratitude and pride. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus met her gaze and nodded, just once. And for the first time all night, his smile wasn't armor. It was victory.